When I decided to become an architect is a little unusual compared to a lot of my compadres when I compare notes. I was going to be a history professor. And I got my bachelor's degree, honors degree in history at the U, and I was headed for graduate school and PhD history professor. Graduated in 1968. They did away with graduate deferments, eligible for the draft, advanced infantry training, Vietnam, a path I was not interested in. Got into Navy OCS, Officer Candidate School, where you had to volunteer to go to Vietnam out of Navy OCS. I thought, great. I volunteered for a refrigerator ship out of Newport, Rhode Island, and I got sent to Vietnam. One of the first 3 non-volunteers they sent, Smith, Strassner, and Stewart. And while in the Navy, I realized that I was really interested in a lot of things, different things. Art, science, people, politics. And I got thinking, what do you do as a profession that covers the broadest range of things and interests? I thought, what about architecture? It has an art component, a technical component, a political component, a social component, deals with people on every level. Maybe I'll try that. So I got out of the Navy, went to architecture school, and I didn't know anything about architecture. Because when you go to school in the 60s, you don't take classes like physics and calculus and all the prerequisites for architecture. You wouldn't have anything to do with the slide rule. It was all existential poetry and sociology and politically relevant things. So I had to do an extra year of school when I got out of the Navy to be eligible for architecture school. When I started, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what a section drawing was. I didn't know what an elevation drawing was. I didn't know anything. Fortunately, the year that I was taking all the prerequisites, a professor of architecture, Gus Bress Van Kempen was his name, agreed to do a reading program with me, and I read a book every week that he told me to read, and then we'd spend 2 or 3 hours talking about it. All volunteer on his part. No, I wasn't registered for any courses or anything. It was a great way to become familiar with architecture in the broader sense. I went to the University of Utah for architecture school, and it was very interesting to me because in catching up, I started school in January. When I got out of the Navy, the end of December. And so I was off sequence for the quarters, and I ended up taking basic design in the summer in 15-hour course credit in the summer, so basically 3 quarters of school in one session, which I thought was good because it was quite intense. We were there for a long time. Architecture school is a lot of work, long hours. It was interesting in the development of camaraderie in the studio and your fellow students. In hindsight, I probably learned a whole lot more from my fellow students than I did the faculty, and we worked together quite well in solving most of the problems that were given us by the faculty and challenging the faculty. We were known to challenge what they were doing. For example, we had a restaurant project that was assigned to us, and we went out and interviewed all these people in the restaurants that we knew, that owned restaurants, that cooked in restaurants, that worked in restaurants, to see what they were like. And we were actually reprimanded for doing that because we weren't doing it by the little rules that the faculty had. It was a good class. It was a very interesting education in that it was not only technical and not only developing the skills you needed to work in the architectural profession, but also in the development of the camaraderie and the group relationships and so on, which served us well in the actual practice of the profession, which has a high demand for that kind of skill. 1975, I graduated from the U with Master of degree. It was a bad market, and so I applied and was accepted to do the Historic American Building Survey through the National Park Service for the summer, which gave me 4 months to look for work. At the time, I was married, I had a young toddler daughter, and I needed a job. And the Historic Building Survey was an excellent way to do that. Not only was it a great experience, but it also bought me time to find a job. And then I went to work for John Clausen for a few months, and then Carpenter and Stringham for a few years, and then Brixton and Christopher for quite a while, and then Edwards and Daniels, and then Gillis, Stransky, Bremsman. Working with John Clausen, which I also worked for him for a summer when I was in school. He was a small practice, and it was good because we got a lot of exposure to engineering consultants and clients and other things that larger firms you might not get at that, right out of school like that. Unfortunately, he didn't have a growth pattern, and we didn't develop a lot of work. And one Friday he said, "I don't have anything for you guys to do." And I said, "Okay, that's it." And Monday morning I went out and got a new job at Carpenter and Stringham. And that was a good place to work for a while. I got my license while I was there, passed all the exams, and had some good experience technically there. But there was no future there. And so one weekend I decided that that wasn't a future, so I called Jim Christopher, and he hired me and worked there for several years. And that was excellent experience. They were very good architects and actually did what I think is probably some of my best work there in the preservation development strategies work that we did when I was on the Heritage Foundation. That was superb stuff. But it didn't sense a future there either. They were not developing a culture of growth with younger people. And so I went to Edwards and Daniels, and similar experience there. When Abe Gillis and Bob Brotherton started Brotherton Gillis in 1978, I asked Abe, I'd been licensed for a couple of years, I asked Abe, I said, "I want to come work for you." And he said, "No. I like you as my friend." We were neighbors. He said, "I like you as my friend, maybe someday." 1986, Abe called me and he said, "We're talking with David Brems about bringing him in and forming a firm with a broader practice than Abe and Mike had. And Abe said, now I would like you to join me as my partner." Bingo, yeah, that's what I wanted to do. And I said yes. Mike and Abe had a very strong practice in industrial and some institutional work. David had a lot of portfolio with private development, and I had some good planning experience. And so we thought that was a good, healthy merger of broader market areas as well as broader personalities. So we're very different people. And it turned out to be a very positive group, in spite of all our idiosyncrasies. The first thing we did, at least that I was project manager on, was the consolidated maintenance facility at TOOELE Army Depot. In fact, I'd only been with them a week or so before we interviewed for that job. And that was a significant project in the early environmental issues that were associated with it. It had zero discharge of pollutants, even though it was cleaning engine parts and doing a lot of nasty processes. We had very sophisticated roof skylights over the shop floor. The shop floor is about 8 acres. And in the interior of that space, the natural color of light was daylight on the work floor with no glare. Pretty significant impact from an environmental point of view, long before everybody talked about LEED or anything else. And from there we moved into some planning work. We did the Judicial System Master Plan for the state of Utah, State of Utah Library Studies, both of which I led the teams on those, And that was sort of suited to my skills. And we developed a lot of work based on the judicial master plan and subsequent court remodeling, and established a relationship with the administration and office of the courts. And then that sort of established the firm as a broader base than industrial work only, and expanded our ability to work for the state of Utah in a wide variety of projects, not only buildings, but also in the planning and helping solve their problems. Like the library study, for example, which was, at the time, all the colleges and institutions in Utah had the worst library in the state. All I had to do was ask them. And so they wanted a pile of money that was way out of the reach of the legislature. And they said, no, wait a minute, you guys all can't have the worst. Somebody's got to be worse than the other one. So we were hired to sort through that. And we were able to do it quite effectively. We had some good consultants, had library expertise, and I visited well over 50 court facilities in the state. At the time, I was the only person that had actually seen them all, because the people knew their regions, but they didn't know the whole state. That was in the court's plan. We did the same thing with the libraries, so that we could say, do you realize that such and such a library doesn't have this? Or do you realize that such and such a school does not even have a library? Wouldn't they be in worse shape than you? We were able to come to a unanimous decision of all the university and college presidents as to the priority order of which libraries deserve the first attention. We worked through that list. In a way, that's pretty remarkable with all those egos and institutions. But we were able to do it, and all those projects were realized in the order that we resolved, at a budget that was a fraction of their demands. And that established our credibility in those areas, which led us to the open space plan and the Salt Lake City zoning ordinance and some of the other things we did that weren't in the traditional architectural project stuff. There's various ways to look at it. If I look at a building project, we did the addition to the Kazir Library at Utah State University. It turned out to be a very successful project. And so when I see the impact of that building on the users and the hundreds and hundreds of students that are going through Utah State University, they're feeling a positive experience with that building, that's very satisfying. On the other hand, there's the planning work, like open space plan for Salt Lake City and the preservation development strategies, which had long-lasting impact in a positive way on the community of Salt Lake. So which projects are the most satisfactory? Well, they have different reasons, for different reasons. I'll give you an example. I go to Costco for my hearing aids. And this bright young woman, probably late 20s, is testing my hearing more thoroughly than anybody's ever done. And on the wall is a Utah State diploma. So I mentioned to her, you went to Utah State. Yes. Did you ever go in the library? Oh, yeah. And she was going on and on about the library and how wonderful the light was, and how she and her now husband used to spend every day studying in the library in different locations. She was going on and on. Finally, she stopped mid-sentence. She said, why did you ask? And I said, well, I had the good fortune of being part of the design team for that building. And she goes, really? Wow, that's wonderful. And she took off again and started talking about the building, on and on and on. So I leave and I think, okay, here is a person, as a student at that university, that had a profoundly positive experience in a building that we had done. That is very rewarding professionally. Oh yeah, you have the disappointments of projects that you've wanted to do and thoroughly invested in and have pursued for years, and you don't get them, such as the state courts building, which was a design competition, and we had worked for years with that goal in mind, and we didn't get it. And there are also disappointments in some of the construction and people that you work with. as many know, I was involved in doing most of the hiring for GSBS. And I think I did a pretty good job of developing and creating a culture and an environment of people that were effective in defining GSBS and doing some things. But occasionally you miss. And it's disappointing when you feel like you're investing a lot of emotion in a young person's career development and it doesn't work. But when it works, it's fabulous. And we've had many successes. People say, how did you decide to retire? And for me, it got to a point where I could say to myself, all right, I've had some reasonably good success in the profession, in the various organizations, the AIA, Urban Land Institute, and others. And I could say, I hired well, I mentored well, it's time to get out of the way. And when that hit me, it's time to get out of the way, it was an easy decision. Been there, done that, get out and let others do it. Don't stand in their way. When we were in school and originally talked about it, they talked about these architects as these individuals. You know, we had a book we had to read in school. It was called The Master Builders. It was written by Peter Blake, I remember. And the Master Builders were Frank Lloyd Wright, Mies van der Rohe, and Le Corbusier. And the book treated these guys as, you know, like heroes and the master builders. Well, architects don't build anything. Construction people build stuff. These guys weren't master builders, they were good self-promoters and individual stuff. When you realize the complexity of a building project or process and all the people involved, the design team, the consultants in the design team, all the people in the design team, then all the people in the construction team, then there's all the people that supply the products and manufacture the products, and all the variety of users, and all the different ways that people react. This isn't one ego guy. It's that notion is totally ridiculous, in my opinion, and part of my issues with the school. That architects are only a part of the process. Granted, an important part and an influential part, and a part that can set the direction for the other players to do their roles. Theater reference. And the notion that some of these firms had, that it's all about me, Mr. Architect, and it's not acknowledging the contribution of all the different players involved in that process, I had a hard time with. And one of the things we did when Abe and Mike and David and I sat down to talk about forming our firm was to say, what is it that we didn't like about all the places we worked before? And let's not do it again. And so it's not a firm about us. It's a firm about hiring and mentoring and nurturing people so that we can become superfluous or can leave, and what we've created continues to do good things. And I think we were successful in that, at that goal, because Abe's retired and gone, and David's still working, but you know, the GSBS is thriving, and we got out of the way. But it was a collaborative thing, and acknowledging that it's a collaborative process where the architect has an important role at a particular time in that process. Master builder, no. I started with a pencil. Always been a pencil guy. Did do ink on Mylar. And yeah, the technology is an interesting influence on the profession. And it's been an important thing. Now, personally, I'm not savvy on a lot of it. And I can draft well, I can draw well, and I can use ink, and I can use Mylar and all those kinds of things. But what the technology did, and the firms that embraced that and realized that if you were to think of a pencil on a piece of paper, and then you get to Mylar, and then you get to linen. We used to draw on linen before Mylar. And all of those are technological advances that improved the way you were able to do it. And Abe when we first put the firm together, we were using pin bar drafting, which was a bar on the drafting board that had punched sheets, and we were doing overlay drawings similar to what CAD became on the computer, but it was manual CAD, really. But it was the same idea of layering and thinking about how do we improve what we do all the time. Technology was another tool that improved how the way we do things. The idea of building modeling, where you can look at ductwork conflict with structural conflicts, is very useful. Can I do it? No. Do I understand its value? Yes. And it's been an important thing in the profession, especially in people being able to work in environments that aren't sitting at the drafting board in a particular room. Watching a lot of people grow in the profession and hiring people right out of school and seeing how that works, I would say to them that you need your education for its value, for what you learn there. But you really need to be open to the real world experiences that are what's going to determine your success. I use the term swagger for the students that are good students, and they got swagger, and they come out of school and they know everything, and they get through and they pass the exams right away and so on, and they're doing great. That's useful at that point. But then it comes a point where you need to lose the swagger. And you need to lose the I strain, I this, I that, I this, and learn the word we. And understand the importance of the contributions that all of those other players in the building process make. And you lose your swagger, speak in terms of we, and become a understanding and gracious and valuable member of the process. Then you will succeed. One of the things that I was involved in, and I particularly think is useful, and I'm glad I did, was the education components that we did. When I was on the Heritage Foundation board, and I went on the board when I was a student, they recruited me because they needed somebody young. Everybody else was in their 50s or 60s probably. I was in my 20s. And we were fighting the preservation battles, confrontation, toe-to-toe in the intersection, screaming at each other over the Eagle Gate apartments or whatever. And we thought, you know what? Maybe we should get in education and heighten the awareness of the historic value of these buildings at a younger age, rather than in the adults screaming at each other. So we started programs in the 4th grade, which is where they had Utah history in the curriculum, and the 7th grade, mostly the 4th grade. And we started in the schools, and I did that for, I don't know how many, 20 years maybe. And we covered thousands of students, tens of thousands of students, hundreds of teachers in workshops. It's been a very good way as an architect to articulate what we do to school teachers and school kids and young people. And to me, that's been a very valuable part of what I've done. That's been very helpful to me in articulating and understanding the value of what we do. I had a history professor, his name was Aziz Atiya. In terms of influencing me on the value of education and disciplined learning, he was probably the most influential person. And he was an amazing scholar, and He could lecture on some obscure crusade from 1100 for an hour and a half, and you didn't realize you were sitting in a class because he knew his stuff. And he taught me that you've got to know your stuff. He was very influential that way. As architects, I learned a lot from Jim Christopher. I also learned a lot of good things from Chris, and I also learned some things that I probably did differently. But it was that sounding with Chris, and I had a very good relationship in terms of talking to each other about stuff, about things and issues, and not only in building, but in the planning and in the AIA and in the community and so on. Abe Gillis, also, and from a technical point of view, Abe was a master at understanding the technical aspects of construction and realizing the importance of your people. So it's not about the building project as much as it is about the people you work with. And he had huge respect in the construction world. Contractors, when they talk about architects, Abe was in a discussion that most of us weren't at that level in terms of admiration from the construction world, because he valued what they did. And that was an important thing for me to learn. I'm glad I did it. It wasn't what I thought I was going to do, but I think I did it well. And I'm pleased with the fact that I did that, and I had a good career and made a lot of good friends. And I see young people that are doing great things, particularly if I hired them right out of school. It makes me feel wonderful.